Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to this discussion of the Embassy of the Future. We're very much looking forward to a lively conversation tonight. I know many of you will attend many and join in many of these kinds of webinars, but this one will, I hope, feel different because it's more of a blue skies conversation. Embassies in the past, they weren't buildings. They were groups of people sent out to connect on behalf of the leadership, on behalf of the government, of the sovereign. And over time, the idea of an embassy developed into this more bricks and mortar embassy that we have today. But what we want to do in this discussion is to try and imagine the embassy of the future. Is there a way of capturing this idea of connection that an embassy represents and making that more influential, more relevant to the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century? I want to start just by introducing our two fantastic discussants on this topic. They really need no introduction. You'll know His Excellency Omar Sultan Al-Olema, the world's first minister for artificial intelligence, and one of the pioneers, one of the thought leaders in this field. He's also, I understand, the first minister ever to undertake military service. But that's maybe a conversation for another day. And we're also joined, as well as His Excellency, by another excellency. We have double excellencies this evening. The great Mohammed Abu Shahab, who is the UAE ambassador in Brussels, but also one of the lead thinkers on the future of diplomacy and international relations, and very much on the front lines at the moment of the effort to adapt the embassy and adapt diplomacy for this strange period of coronavirus, which we're all experiencing. I'll turn over to those two speakers in just a moment, but a couple of housekeeping tips. We'll be on for somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half, depending on how the conversation goes. We don't have, I'm afraid, the means to take questions on the screen in the usual way, but I would love to get your questions via Twitter if you have them, so that I can put them to our panelists. You can find me on Twitter at @tfletcher. Send me your questions and I will put them into the conversation. At @tfletcher. My name is Tom Fletcher. I'm a visiting professor at New York University and advisor at the Emirates Diplomatic Academy and various other bits and pieces as well. And I wrote back 4 or 5 years ago a book called The Naked Diplomat, which tried to imagine the diplomacy of the future. I have to admit, I never imagined we would be here in 2020 in this context, and we'll open that up and unpack it a bit. I hope that this conversation will generate new ideas, new thinking, but will also inspire all of you who are joining us to challenge us, provoke us, and actually go beyond the ideas that we're able to share today. So welcome, and let's enjoy this conversation. Your Excellency Minister Omar, I want to start with you, just to almost set the scene. Many people joining us today will be from the diplomatic field. We're not necessarily nature's greatest entrepreneurs or innovative thinkers. Our skills often lie maybe somewhere else. So can you just help us kind of ease us into this conversation by sharing with us your sense of what the big challenges and opportunities are that lie ahead in the technological space?
Thank you, Tom. It's an absolute pleasure being here. And, I'm not sure about the entrepreneur's comment, but I would say you're the greatest communicators and the greatest networkers out there. So there's a lot that I could learn from you, and hopefully we'll be able to unpack that during the session as well from His Excellency Ambassador Abu Shahab as well. The world is going through very, very interesting times. I find myself talking to many people over the course of the last couple of months and saying we're going through the biggest crisis of our generation. And we find ourselves bored at home, Netflixing or watching webinars, and really not understanding how big of a change we're going through. We're going through, for the first time in history, people being quarantined at home, people not being able to travel or move about, going through complete economic shutdown. And that really is going to bring with it a lot of challenges and opportunities that are going to face us for years to come. This is not going to be something that we're going to recover from a year or two down the line. It's going to be something that we're going to constantly see its impact come and unravel as the years and decades go by. We've never been through something similar before. And that's why I think it's important for us to have dialogues like this, to understand where are we going and how we can actually better prepare ourselves for what's to come. Now, that being said, I do consider COVID-19 to be the greatest accelerator of modern history. We, as you all know, host something called the World Government Summit in the UAE, where we bring governments from around the world and thought leaders to come and discuss what exactly can governments expect and prepare for. And what we've realized is what most experts considered to be coming 10 years down the line, COVID brought in 2-3 weeks. We all knew that virtual education was coming. Most people were expecting virtual education to be coming by 2028 or 2025 at the soonest. We got that in less than a month because of COVID-19. The technology exists today for many, many different things. The technology exists today for us to communicate with each other. It exists for us to automate a lot of things, but the political willingness was not present before. And I think COVID just accelerated that political willingness. The other thing was that we always were worried about those who were not willing to adapt to the new norm. So there is always this backpedaling of, should we have everything virtual? No, we need to have it physical as well for those who do not want to get the service virtually. And there was this notion of, is this the right thing? Are we willing to explore or not? And there never really was the political will, I think, in any country on earth to jump and leapfrog into the new digital era that we were going to go in overnight. But COVID was that, disruptor and driver. There's a joke that we tell each other, which is, if you ask most entities right now, whether they're government or private, who was responsible for your digital innovation? Was it your CEO or CIO? The answer would be COVID-19. It's the main driver for this digital transformation that we're seeing. And it's also bringing with it a set of opportunities and a set of challenges. As you can see right now, the challenges that we're seeing everywhere around the world, that this quarantine and lockdown effect that COVID has brought to us is causing a lot of frustration, is causing a lot of issues for people that might actually cause unrest in many countries. And we see some of these issues arise right now, which governments need to face. But as well, there are opportunities for us to communicate with people in ways that we could never have done so before. Today, if you send an email to any person, or if you try to contact them at any time of the day, you are more likely to get a response than any other time in history, because people are sitting, they are connected, and they're waiting for the social interaction with one another. We're also able to do a lot more because we don't need to communicate. We don't need to commute from one place to another. We don't need to, waste time traveling halfway across the world to be able to meet face to face. And that brings with it a lot of opportunities. So I think also the amount of knowledge that we were able to generate and also consume in the last 2 to 3 months is something that is unequaled and will not be equaled anytime in the near future. So there are many opportunities and challenges there. If we're going to talk about the diplomatic field, I actually think that, and again, I don't mean this as an insult, I don't mean this as an offense, but I do believe that the diplomatic field had a lot of potential to leverage digital technologies and improve over the years. But there was always this need for us to be very careful with regards to how we move into this digital realm, and also to understand what the need is. Because at the end of the day, this is a very sensitive field that includes more than one party that need to deal with it. I remember mentioning this in our conversation right before the session. There's a lot of technology that we can deploy to automate the whole process of someone wanting to go and visit a country. We can also automate, the experience of them visiting the country virtually, which is something that we do have the technology for today. And then finally, I think technology today allows us to break down all walls between people, whether it's cultural walls, language barriers, whether it's things that make people not want to go from one place to another. And we have the capability today. The only reason why we don't deploy it is because we don't have the willingness to do so. And COVID really is going to drive us in that direction quickly. If you ask people what they miss the most, and I tend to do this in all conversations I have, 90% of the people I asked said we miss traveling. The other 10% said traveling and socializing, or socializing on its own. But traveling is something that people really, really take to heart. And it's something that affects us all as human beings. For those of us who can afford it, and for those of us who've experienced it already, it's really something that changes our being. It changes our mentality as well. So how can we use and leverage these embassies and these entities that are created by governments across the world to ensure that people are attracted to your country? How can we use them as well to capture the knowledge necessary to improve our own countries? And then finally, how can we use them to try to attract the right people to our countries, try to move them to our countries as well, and to make sure that we retain them and keep them happy? That's something that the UAE has done very well. We have 200 nationalities here, although we did not deploy specifically digital systems to do that. But imagine if we can really attract the best of the best to the UAE, and we can make sure that we can keep them. People like yourself, Tom, who come here, who really contribute to the society, who love it in the UAE. And then even when they go home, they become ambassadors to the UAE. That is something that technology will allow us to do a lot. And I think we need to really deploy technology to ensure that the impact of an embassy can be magnified 1,000-fold. And I would like to stop here, and then maybe the conversation can take us somewhere else.
Thank you so much. And it just sets a kind of optimistic, ambitious outlook for the conversation, which I think is great, because what you often find when you talk to diplomats in the midst of this crisis is actually they're more pessimistic about the impact on diplomacy, because they can see, diplomacy is a profession that relies on the last 3 feet, the human connection, literally the handshake is the pinnacle of a peace process. And that has all been much, much harder to emulate online. Plus, of course, we're not just social distancing, it's a time of national distancing as well. So what I really want to do is with Mohammed's help, start to unpack some of those core functions of diplomacy and an embassy, and then almost a sort of thought experiment, then bring them back to Oman and work out what do they look like in the future. So, Mohammed, can you kind of get us started on that? I mean, for people who don't follow it closely, what exactly do you do? What does an embassy do? What's your day-to-day existence like?
All right. Well, Tom, let me begin by saying that I'm really honored and very, very pleased to be joining you this way. And actually, it's not just 2 excellencies that you have here. We have 3 excellencies. So it's a triple excellency gathering. But I think some of the core functions that we do revolve around representing the UAE. So we're the face of the UAE in a certain country. In my case, in Brussels, we're the face of the UAE to Belgium, Luxembourg, and the EU. And this means that the embassy makes official representations, it receives and relays official communications, and represents the UAE at official functions. But then a very important and I think critical function for us is delivering and explaining UAE messages and positions. And our counterparts are ones that use us, let's say, to get a sense of what the UAE stands for, what our position is in certain areas. And when we're, very successful at that, in the best case scenario, we are able to actually influence and of course, defend the UAE's interests. The other thing that we spend a lot of time on is in, I would say, monitoring, gathering, collecting information and intelligence in order to be able to relay back to capital a fuller picture, a clearer picture, and an understanding of the host country when it comes to bilateral issues, multilateral issues, and so on. And then I think a important function is how we connect, or let's say matchmake, between and seek opportunities for the UAE, for UAE businesses and individuals, helping them to connect with the right counterparts in the country that we cover. And again, in the best case scenario here, we're proactively creating connections that foster the UAE's interests, whether that comes from attracting foreign direct investments or launching joint projects or organizing joint events. This connection matchmaking role is an important one. And then, of course, it's consular services. And these are services that we provide to our citizens, but also to the citizens and residents in the host country. Along with all of these functions that I mentioned, there are tasks and needs that we provide for visiting delegations or helping UAE ministries or entities understand a topic that's being discussed that's of relevance to the UAE. So, for example, here with the EU, there are many technical and regulatory issues that are being negotiated that are of interest to the UAE. And the embassy really has to become deeply engaged in these files and acquire a certain level of technical expertise that then can assist our UAE stakeholders. And, this is, I would say, what we in Brussels, but across many embassies, this is really some of the core functions that we do. And perhaps, spending a little bit of time talking about how these functions or some takeaways from how these functions were disrupted during the current circumstances that we're in. Really, I think there's a lot, and I'm very proud about how the UAE embassy here, and I think many embassies across the world, were able to quickly adapt and adjust. But there is, the element of the meeting, which is, I would say it's a primary tool of our craft. This is something that was mostly disrupted. And so international summits, public diplomacy events, delegation visits, encounters at receptions, these meetings really are the lifeblood of diplomacy. And they allow us to deliver messages, gather valuable intelligence, create familiarity and comfort with our counterparts, build long-term relations. And that all helps us to better defend the UAE's interests. And really, nothing has been quite the same, I would say, without the meeting. But like I said, when we quickly were able to shift to a digital way of engagement, I still see it as a huge advantage that we have this possibility. And I sometimes wonder what we would have done had we not had this possibility. I really think that our work would have come to a standstill if we weren't able to engage in this way. But being able to engage this way, there are some takeaways of some distinct advantages. His Excellency Minister al-Ulama actually touched on some of them. It's been, having video meetings is quick and easy. It saves you a lot of time and energy in not traveling. And the fact that meetings can be attended virtually from anywhere and with as many people as you'd like is a huge advantage. What I found is counterparts have also been much more available. Our agendas are not as full because we're not doing a lot of the things that we used to do outside. And so this might be temporary, but certainly I found that it was easier and quicker to be able to engage with counterparts and to do so more often. Another thing that I think has been, a distinct advantage that I expect will live on past COVID-19 is in high-level meetings and summits. I've seen already during this time at least 3 high-level meetings where we would normally have had, a head of state or head of government converging to Brussels that were able to engage digitally, and it worked. It worked so well that it's difficult to see why we would go back to the old ways for these particular type of meetings. There are others, and this is where I think where it's less evident how you replace this. There are other types of meetings, especially when there are decisions and negotiations and political crises that, I find I don't see how they can move to the online space, at least not for now. And it's in those meetings where you have side discussions, where you have deals, where you look at somebody in the eye and they are able to come to an agreement, and as you say, finish with a handshake and a deal is done. This you for now at least aren't able to do digitally. So, like I say, I think there are some distinct advantages that I've found in the online diplomacy, but there are some things in our traditional diplomacy that I think just won't go away. Nothing really compares to a face-to-face meeting when it comes to building relationships, obtaining information, delivering messages. And I think you've called this before, Tom. The magic of diplomacy is in personal relationships, and I think, at least for now, it's not evident how we get to digitize that. But my view is that we're going to be someplace, and I think we have to use the opportunity that COVID has presented us with, and not squander it, to really push for this forward movement. And I think there's a lot of the functions that I spoke about, a lot of the activities that can already be either supported, reinforced, or perhaps even completely replaced with AI, with advanced technologies. And I think that we need to find that hybrid space where we're using the best of online diplomacy and living with the traditional diplomacy that we're used to pre-COVID-19.
Thank you so much for that breakdown. I mean, you've described a world, it combines so many different professions in a way. You're a journalist, you're a lobbyist, you're a travel agent, you're an analyst, you're a sentiment miner. It's this great combination of different, you're a psychologist in some ways, different classic roles. And it may help us as we dig into how the role will change, actually to compare it to some of these other professions. So provocatively, I think the first one you described, the function of just relaying messages, I would argue in some ways that should already have been replaced by an email. Yeah. I mean, there's much more to it than that. Famously, there's that line Palmerston said when he saw the telephone, "Oh my God, it's the end of diplomacy." And then someone else said, "You can replace the Foreign Office with a fax machine." Some of these things which we haven't automated, we've now been forced to realize can be automated. But I want to come on to Omar and then say, so you look at that role that Mohammed has described there so kind of coherently, particularly that human connection, that magical, the empathy and emotional intelligence of that. Can we automate Mohammed? Can we replace him with a robot?
So I personally do not want to automate Mohammed, even if I could, but I don't think we can.
You might want that.
What I am going to say, Tom, on this is first, we have learned to appreciate, ambassadors and embassies because of just how much we pester them when we travel. And I would like to be the first person to say thank you to Mohammed and all other ambassadors and people that are working in missions, because they stay up all night, they work all day to really represent the country in the best way possible. Now, seeing that breakdown, I actually want to simplify all of these things and the jobs that Mohammed says that embassies do. And I think that all of that can be broken down to 3 C's. Most embassies, from what I understand, consolidate information, so they're able to attract information, put it together and consolidate in a way that is packaged for the representing state, communicate to and from these countries, so they are a communication medium, and then finally connect. So this is where the human, trust element is really built. And I think technology is not here to replace all 3 C's, right? These 3 C's are there for us to build on or improve and use technology to do that. But it will be unwise and I think quite ignorant for us to think that technology will be a replacement mechanism for ambassadors, even in the near term. And I'll tell you why that is. When in the 1970s and 80s, there was a device that was seen as one of the most revolutionary devices for teaching. It was called the PDD, the Personal Dictation Device. And there were analysts, there were futurists who were saying that the PDD is going to replace teachers, it's going to replace schools, and it's going to be something that will allow people to study from their homes. And what a PDD was, technically, was just a recorder for us to record our voice. And some of these futurists saw that a teacher can record the full lesson on their personal dictation device and just make copies of it and distribute it. But what we've realized is this wasn't the future that we've lived in, and this is not the future that we are in today, because we need this human connection for certain things. And I think specifically in diplomacy, you will not be able to build the trust and convince the other party to actually do what you want them to do and do what's right for your country unless there is this bridge of trust between both individuals. I don't think a automated service is going to be able to do that. With regards to the other parts of it, so consolidating information, I really do believe that can be done a lot more efficiently using technology. Now, technology isn't perfect. It will consolidate, information from billions of people across the world in seconds, but that will also include a lot of garbage. It will include a lot of content that's irrelevant. And we do need to keep on training these systems to understand what are the things that are necessary for us and what are the things that make sense, and also allow them to generate better insights as time passes. We're going to reach a point where they're going to become really good as systems and consolidate, the most relevant information, right when we need them, and really allow them to take the right decisions. And I'd like to touch upon something that His Excellency mentioned, which is, influence and defend interests, which is also intelligence gathering. I think that if we're going to think smartly, social media has a lot of content. And sometimes if you want to know the stance of a country or a population or a specific area on a specific issue, social media is the best platform to use. And on that front, we can actually do that today. I don't think that's something that's going to come in the future. And we can really get many, many good results and as well bad results. So I would like to give you both sides of the coin. The good results is if you know who to go to ensure that this file or this thing that you need gets passed through, then you're going to have a much more guaranteed rate of success. But at the same time, if you're not aware on how these systems are being used, you might actually be played to take decisions that you don't own yourself or you don't believe in yourself. So we've seen this through the case study of Cambridge Analytica in the US, and how they were able to create personas of people and profiles and then know who to target to get a certain specific thing done. That as well can be done on many fronts. It's done to us as well as consumers. So certain companies influence what we buy, and they influence the way that we consume things. And sometimes some people actually go into debt to buy something that they don't necessarily need and they never knew they wanted, but because it was targeted to them or sent to them in the right place and in the right time and through the right medium. So I think that technology can do a lot there to ensure that we're a lot more effective. With regards to communicating, what most people don't know is we actually leave a lot of digital footprints behind. So our digital trail is much, much longer than our physical trail. You might be sitting in your home and not moving a single step or saying a single word, but you're consuming things on your phone, you're consuming things on the internet, and you're also leaving marks there. And with regards to this, you can actually understand the person you're dealing with a lot better if you understand how do you capture his digital trail and create, let's say, an image of him that he would not necessarily communicate to you directly. So when you come to talk to that person, you're able to relate and to build the final and most important thing, which is connect, build that trust, build a bridge that will allow them to actually, agree with you and to advocate for you. Another point that I'd like to mention as well on this, to conclude this remark, is the fact that technology can be definitely used to influence, let's say, the way that people consume your content, and also create more let's say, people who are going to become advocates for you. And I'll give you a simple example for this. If you look at Japanese anime, for example, cartoons, right? Or certain series, for example, Turkish series, Korean series, or series from different places on Earth. Because of the mediums that we have today, the platforms, the AI platforms like Netflix and others, you are able to send this content to these people who have not necessarily been to these countries. I might not have gone to South Korea, but consuming the South Korean content in the right manner and at the right time through these platforms will make me advocate for that country. It's the same for Japan, it's the same for Turkey, it's the same for the US. And we are able to do that today on a mass scale. No one has done it as well as, I'd say, the Americans and the Japanese. But we're seeing other countries follow suit. right now. There are a lot of series that are coming out. There's a lot of content that's coming out, and it's positioned on platforms that are not necessarily for native speakers, right? So, they have South Korean content on Netflix, and you ask yourself, why would they do that? And then it's a huge soft power tool that make people defend these countries without even putting or setting their foot there. So we can really leverage technology to do a lot more and get a lot more guaranteed results, I think.
I want to pick up on the first of those areas, the one about the first C, about consolidating information. And Mohammed, I know you're obviously in a multilateral embassy rather than a classic bilateral one, but obviously you're still information gathering and horizon scanning and in that way. When I started as a diplomat, my first posting was Kenya, and I would write a 3-page report for London on Kenyan views on Somalia, on the basis of 4 conversations and 2 newspaper articles. That was my information gathering. Yeah. My antennae were the movers and shakers in Nairobi, and then the main newspapers. 15 years ago in Paris, I might have expanded that a little bit further to maybe a wider set of opinion formers, maybe more think tanks, for example. But I would still write in quite a magisterial way, the French believe this on the basis of those 6 conversations, or 8 conversations in a book. Now, obviously, in Lebanon, I was trying to experiment a bit more with a deeper dive into social media. As Omar says, almost trying to use social media to understand sentiment, to mine sentiment, and ultimately to influence sentiment, where it had an influence on the day-to-day decisions of that country. Can you give us a sense of how has this moved? I mean, are diplomats now using social media more than 5 or 6 years ago for information gathering? And are they actually using, is it just a Twitter account to curate that? Or are you able to use more sophisticated tools now?
Well, look, I'd say a lot has changed, because we are not competing directly with the news that anybody sitting in Abu Dhabi will be able to receive probably before you have the time to even type it up and send it out. So then you have to become a lot more selective about what information is it that you want to extract from, the story that is available publicly. What's the let's say background intel? What's the stuff that you're getting because of your presence here, because of your interactions, because of your engagement with the movers and shakers? And how can you contextualize and put more depth to that content that is readily available, that your desk officer sitting in Abu Dhabi will be able to pull up? And I think in social media, certainly we're using it to collect the messages that are being diffused by our counterparts, by the public opinion and so on. And we are also using it to put out our content, which is becoming much, much more coordinated, much more, we're, I would say, learning to take advantage of it. But we're really, I think, far from using the analytical and statistics and intelligence, AI, of how to best target, the audience that you want. How to use it smartly, I think, is one that is still being understood and developed. And, if I can go back to something that His Excellency was saying about the paper trail that you leave, I think there's a lot of data that artificial intelligence perhaps can help to, let's say, prepare a diplomat for a certain engagement. So if, big data, not 3 or 4 diplomats or analysts that you have in your office, can give you as, here's the background on this individual, here's the bio that he has online. But if there's a, respecting privacy and all this, but looking at publicly available statements and interactions and who they've met with and what kind of things they've said, and giving you a picture that one person won't be able to do, I think that can really help in our targeting, just like you do with social media and how you present a message to a certain audience. I can see that being applied to how do I engage with this certain individual, and just giving you that advantage of the approach and background that normally you would not be able to get.
That's really interesting. I want to check then with the Minister whether, in your experience from looking at the use of AI in other fields, what we can learn from here. I'm thinking of two scenarios, drawing from what Mohammed says. When in Lebanon, I used to drive up the mountain to see, for example, Wali Jumblat, the leader of the Druze, and he would have in his head a memory of the last 50 interactions with British ambassadors over the last 30 years. I wouldn't have any of that. I didn't have a knowledge management process to retrieve a really crucial conversation that my predecessor had 10 years ago. So knowledge management, I think, as diplomats, we don't use the technology very effectively to do that. Another scenario, the great diplomats, Mohammed does this all the time. I've seen him in action. They arrive in a room and they can scan a room, and they know bits of information about the different people in that room. You remember that the last conversation you had with the higher education minister, he mentioned that his daughter is going to AUB. You remember that the arts minister has always said that she's always wanted to come and see the Louvre Abu Dhabi. You have these different bits of information, but it's quite amateurish. That's just in our heads. We don't have a piece of AI that is helping us store and retrieve those bits of information fast. In a way, when someone describes AI as like having 1 million interns, what you want is the greatest second secretary, diplomatic advisor in the world alongside you saying, over there is the Minister for Culture, and you're meant to raise with her something that the Minister raised with you 3 months ago and you haven't got around to, and so on. Can you help us with that?
If I may, just jump in there, because I hope that will help with the answer. We are limited by, in a sense, our biological capacity. And certainly there are connections, as you say. I can imagine a world where a pop-up comes and says, that minister you've spoken. But actually what you don't know is that they spoke with our Minister of Artificial Intelligence, and they had a conversation where they spoke about this, flagging an opportunity for you. It's exciting. This is where we'd like to get to.
So thank you both, Your Excellencies. I think first and foremost, everyone thinks that AI is going to solve every issue, and my answer here is going to be disappointing. I think sometimes it's going to bring more issues, but in general, it's going to create a better world. Now, everything that can be imagined, my general belief in life is that anything that I can imagine, at one point of time, I'll be able to achieve. So anything that you're saying from a theoretical perspective can be done. Now, how it's done is another question, whether we have the budgets, the political willingness, whether we understand what are the security risks of deploying such a system, where every single interaction you have is monitored and is added and is flagged. It can be used both ways. It can be used for you, but if someone actually penetrates it, they can use it against you. So there's always these sides that I tend to look at when I talk about technology. Technology is not a silver bullet, it's a tool. And how we use it is important. What I'd like to just bring up is it's not always AI that's required. Sometimes it's RPA, which is robotic process automation, just improving our processes in a much better way to make them more effective. And, in that sense, make the human better. I don't think we should try to replace a person's memory or his brain with an artificial intelligence or with a machine. What we need to do is make sure that he can do the best job that he should do. And second of all, there are so many things that do not require intelligence from a machine perspective, but can go a long way. So, for example, that minister that you're talking about, whose daughter is going to AUB, might have posted on his LinkedIn yesterday that his cat died, or that he'd had a tragedy, or he had an opportunity to celebrate. And these things, what we usually do from a professional standpoint, is we don't have the time to be able to understand who the audience is and what exactly they've gone through on social media. But if the attendee list is already shared beforehand, then there are systems that are not necessarily AI, but can actually go through, scan the names, go online, crawl through their social media feeds, and give you the last 10 things that they posted, whether it was, positive or negative, whether it was a tragedy or celebration. And then you can actually create a discussion beforehand. But that all requires for the person that is actually driving that vehicle, that's actually using these systems, to be organized. Don't expect that system to give you the answer and to give you the talking points right when you're at the meeting with that specific person. It's going to be quite difficult. And then, the matter is going to be a matter of connectivity. How fast is the internet connection for it to be able to see all the faces, get all of their information, analyze them, give you all the talking points. It's science fiction today. It might be possible when we're in a 5G world or a 6G world. But there are so many questions that are being raised there, whether it's privacy, facial recognition. Should we allow that or not? Should we allow these systems to keep creating these digital personas of us? But anyone who has a public social media account today has signed off on a disclaimer saying that whatever I post here is something that people can use for me or against me. So in that sense, I don't think we need cutting-edge technologies to solve these issues. I think that the technologies exist. What AI is going to help us do is it's going to help us optimize ourselves first, and then optimize for the decision that we want to take, or the decision that we want the other person to take. So I'm just going to give you two, very simple examples. There's that most people who work in the field use, which is anything that can be quantified, can be influenced or changed or improved by artificial intelligence. So if you can quantify it, if there's a series of inputs that go into it, you can use AI to improve the result. This is a fact. Now, that being said, you need to understand if the issue that you want to solve is something that includes quantifiable variables. If that is the case, then the main question is, what is the, let's say, biggest source of data that I can use, and how can that decision be taken? So if, for example, the AI requires for the human to communicate, so if it will tell His Excellency Mohammed Abu Shahab how to convince me to fly to Brussels, for example, and meet with him, right? That's the goal that he wants to do. The AI system might actually give him all the things he needs to do to make that happen. But if it requires the human to communicate, and the human is not good at communicating, then it's all going to fall apart and fall in shambles. If he stutters, if he's not confident, etc. So it's not always a technology problem. Sometimes it's a human problem as well. And then the final, let's say, element of this is that there are so many different opportunities where we can use technology, whether it's using Internet of Things to ensure and sensors to ensure that any single person coming into the embassy building is getting a good experience, that we are sure that he's being catered to, that we understand, for example, how he feels or what exactly he's been through before coming in there, because it's a representation of the country, right? Yep. And also trying to leverage technologies to ensure that when a person from the country that we are in is going to our country that we are representing, that they have a good experience. So how can we do that? We can use AI to translate languages. We can, create, let's say, a agenda for him or a program for him automatically through a digital interface, like a website, right? I can go to create a website that is, Brussels and UAE, where every single person flying from Brussels to the UAE can log in. They can put their preferences as a person, what they like to do in general, what are the things, are they adventurous, are they more cultural, etc. And it will create an itinerary for them. It will also book all of the experiences for them. And that's something that's easily doable. You don't really need cutting edge technologies to do that. So don't always look at the most advanced technologies, look at the issue, and then let's find the technologies and work back towards that. And then the final thing I'm going to say is it's not always in the shining technologies that you're going to find the solution or the answer. The more complex the technology, the more complex the issue when it goes wrong. You need something that you can fix easily. So, we don't want the technologies that are unproven today. And that's a point that I always make. You don't want robots in your embassies, because if a robot kills a single person, it becomes a big national catastrophe. So there are so many things that I think the human is going to be necessary for.
Thank you so much. I just want to come back on the translation point, actually, because for most of my diplomatic life, one of the ways that we've judged the best diplomats is their command of language. Diplomats go off and spend years studying the language of the countries they're being hosted to. But you're saying, we should look at the simplest technologies which are coming along soonest rather than the science fiction ones. We must surely be within a few years of having very effective simultaneous translation apps. Will that be one area that diplomacy will change, do you think, Minister?
I do believe that the reason why translation services were not improved faster is because there's not much money to be made in that. Because, usually the investments and the efforts that are being put in things that can be monetized the most. So you see right now, most of the giant companies are in digital advertising because it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So Google's an advertising company, Facebook, even though they offer you certain services, whether it's connecting a person to a person or answering your queries, in general, how they monetize it is through advertising. And it will be very difficult for you to advertise a tool that will help you speak a language. So imagine if I did not know how to speak English and I use the medium, how would they, advertise on it? Will it make me tell you that Burger Kings have the best burgers while I'm trying to have a diplomatic conversation with you? It's quite difficult to do that, but it is something that is doable. All it takes is people to use it. It takes a lot of data, and it takes a lot of correcting the mistakes. And a good example of this is Google. If you looked at the search engine when it was first released in the early 2000s, it was a very terrible platform. It was very, very difficult for you to get what you wanted. And Yahoo was a better platform at that time. Ask was a better platform at that time. But the more people used Google, the more they incentivized people to actually help it improve itself, the better it got. And it's the same with Siri. It's the same with Google Translate. Google Translate in the beginning was really bad. Today, it's actually quite decent. So it's a matter of time. And these things are going to be sorted out. It's also a matter of time of getting these systems to digest all of the content that we have on YouTube, the billions of videos that we have on YouTube of us speaking different languages and trying to triangulate what that means, how it can be translated into another language. So it's also about dedicating the compute power to be able to create that capability. So it is doable. It's on the horizon. I don't think it's quite difficult. And we're going to reach a point where you do not need to navigate many languages. If we are going to talk about science fiction, I'm just going to touch upon one thing, which I think is exciting. Elon Musk has a company called Neuralink, and today they're talking about computer-brain interfaces, CBI, that can allow you to do different things by transmitting certain things to your brain. So if I'm going to simplify the science behind this, the reason why you were able to learn language is because you heard the sound or you saw certain imagery on a piece of paper that sent certain brain waves to your brain that told your brain that this is the letter A, this is how you pronounce it, this is how you say Ahmed, so on and so forth. Imagine if you have an interface that just sends the signals to your brain without you having to go through the hours and hours of reading papers and hours of conversations, where while you're sleeping, it just keeps feeding your brain the brainwave necessary to give you that language. It's still very far off. We're talking about maybe 20 to 30 years down the line, but we will reach a point where you'll be able to learn any language by just downloading it to your brain. We're going to be like the newest iPhone. And I think if that's the key determinant of why you are in your position, then I think you need to be looking for another job.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to come to a question from Afnan that's come through on Twitter. I'm going to start with Mohammed on this one. Afnan's asked, are we going to see virtual embassies soon? And of course, when you look around, sometimes there is a need for a virtual embassy where you can't have a physical presence because maybe there's a conflict there, or maybe you have no strong relationship, government-to-government relationship with that country, but you might want to have a relationship with the people, or because there's been some sort of crisis, or simply because you don't have the resource to have embassies in every single country. Mohammed, can you give us a sense of what an embassy like that needs to do, even if you're not physically in it? Which then effectively puts the question then to the minister on then how technology could help us do that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think already, I would say the COVID crisis has caused our embassy here in Brussels to become a virtual embassy. Look, we were not able to do it 100% because there are some services which necessarily required physical presence. So consular services, the repatriation of our citizens was something that we had to, physically do. But we were able to go virtually in our communications, correspondence, delivering of messages, gathering of intelligence, all of this. Like I said before, maybe not at the level that we would like, but good enough under the current circumstances. And I think that there is a lot of promise in blockchain, which I have to confess, I don't understand, I'm sure, as well as the minister does. But if blockchain can be used, as I understand, to authenticate documents, authenticate records, then I think even those consular services that we had to physically go to complete, we would be able to do digitally. And I think there are certain elements where, I notice it. There are security concerns, confidentiality concerns that we haven't been able to get into enough of a comfort zone with. And perhaps, we hear the promise of 5G, maybe 6G. If there are ways where, a conversation can be secure, and the important thing is there's really the confidence in people. Like I say, I'm having these video conferences, lots of them. They are the next best thing that we currently have. But I know that we're not getting the full picture. We're seeing what's on the screen and not the world around it. We, even in conversations and the communications that are happening online, there is still a lot of formality, a lot of, I would say, scripted sense to it, because I think people just take it as a fact that we don't know who else might be listening in. So it's very different than when you're actually physically in a space and comfortable. And I think this is what's making, European foreign ministers since the beginning of the crisis have only met digitally. But as I understand from my conversations, they are itching to get back to those physical meetings. And perhaps 15th of June might be, they're discussing, not confirmed yet, might be the first meeting that they have physically since the outbreak. But it's because they can have these side conversations, because they can have confidential discussions. And I think once security and confidentiality gets to a level that people are really comfortable with, I think that'll change a lot of what we so far can't completely move virtually.
Thank you. In my experience, when I used to work for the Prime Minister, we used to do everything possible to prevent ministers and leaders having too much direct contact. We would always try and manage the technology of the day. So we would withhold, we didn't like the Prime Minister to be texting his opposite numbers. That was a disaster for us because it meant we couldn't control of communication. So, Minister, can you help us design a virtual embassy? Can you help us imagine an embassy where we can't send humans like Mohammed?
I think it's very doable, especially if we're going to look at consular services, which require a process to be fulfilled. Mm-hmm. I don't see any reason why that can't be automated. If you're going to tell me to automate the connection part and the trust building part, I'll tell you that that's going to be a very, very tough undertaking. But trying to, so let me just go back a few steps here and talk about where technology is quite good. If you're going to ask me about what jobs are going to be taken over by AI and what things are going to be replaced by technology, it's any process that needs to be followed to be fulfilled. Any job that requires that can be replaced by AI. This is a fact, and can be replaced by technology. So, for example, lawyers having to follow specific steps to be able to come up with a legal, let's say, direction, or to come up with a specific verdict or a specific, let's say, argument in court. That's something that AI can do very, very well today. In that sense, I think the only issue that we have with consular services today is that both countries have to agree that they want to go into that process. Because if you have the most cutting-edge systems, but they need to talk to someone who does not have the most cutting-edge systems, and they have, for example, a person that's stamping papers physically, then you have an issue there, because it's all about having the full journey end-to-end being automated. And there are countries, I think, that are willing to explore that with countries like the UAE. So if that is something that the other country has an appetite for, it is doable. All it will require is some sort of business process re-engineering, or understanding exactly what are the touch points, how can we automate that. We can leverage blockchain. We can also leverage the two-factor authentication softwares that are in people's phones, that are in their devices, that today they're using to make payments, they're using to submit their ID in certain places, they're putting their fingerprints, they're scanning their faces. So that at a specific point is even better than that person coming physically. Because at points, what you need from that physical interaction is a signature on a paper. but you're not really 100% sure that it is that person. With technology, you're able to actually get the authentication that you require to ensure that it is him that is required for requiring this service. Now, the other point of the virtual embassy, which is consolidating information, I'm going to reiterate the fact that we are, backwards compared to where we can be. And I'm not talking about the UAE, I'm talking about the world. I'm not sure if there are countries that are leveraging the technologies that exist today to do sentiment analysis on social media, to do information gathering, gathering not just information from that country, but global information in that language on my country, to understand what are the sentiments, to understand what are the statements, to understand the decision makers, what are they thinking and saying on social media, and how that's going to affect me. Sometimes a decision maker does not need to necessarily mention you by name to be taking a position that might affect you as a country, right? So if for example, I am a leader of a country that's opposed to globalization, and the UAE is a country that is pro-globalization, he doesn't necessarily need to mention the UAE, but if you have robust systems that are smart enough to understand the authority and the hierarchy of this person, and to understand the meaning of this specific statement, you can tell that this is a threat to my country, and we need to try to influence that decision or try to convince him not to take that stance, especially if he was a member of the G8 or the G20 or one of these countries. And all of these things, I think, can be supported by technology. It's still required, and this is where we're at today, it still requires a level of human, let's say, oversight. Because a simple mistake can go a long way. You can start a war by making a small mistake, or you can start a diplomatic feud with these countries. So we need smart human beings to be there, understanding what the system is churning out, understanding if it's reliable, annotating that information to ensure that if it does make a mistake, it improves next time. And also being the filter that filters that information before it goes to the stakeholder. So on the information gathering part, that's it. And the final thing is I do believe that we can create systems. So I'll give you an example of something that we use in the AI office. It's not perfect because still we're looking at how we can develop these capabilities internally. But all the notes that I take in meetings and my team take in meetings are, straight away digitized and made into PDF documents that are typed out. They're not just in our handwriting. So the system understands the handwriting enough. And they're saved into a shared server where, I'm able to pull out the content that my colleague worked on or even the junior member of staff and go through it and read it. So this goes a long way with regards to archiving. Imagine if we have a countrywide system where we're able to do that. Security is the biggest concern, so how you're able to secure these documents. But if I'm able to do that, even if a minister from Brussels comes to the UAE and meets with the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, and we had a conversation that His Excellency Ambassador Bishab is not privy to, he's able to actually use the meta tags of Brussels minister and actually find that note and go through it. And it can be flagged to him when that minister goes back to Brussels and he has a meeting with the ambassador. So, technically it's doable. Theoretically it's doable. All it requires now is, putting in the investment and putting in the time and making sure that you have a clear goal in mind.
Yeah. I think you've really, a word you've mentioned several times, Minister, and Mohammed as well, trust in all of this. And I think we're all very conscious now watching the situation with COVID, test, track and trace, for example, of the limits of trust. It may be that the tech outruns the consent that the public give. And this will obviously be different in different societies and depending where you are on the barometer between liberty and security and so on. I experimented in Beirut in 2012 when we were very worried about needing to evacuate Brits because of potential terrorist attacks, with a system where as any Brit who arrived on the plane, anyone with a UK phone, as they landed, they got a text message from me saying, "You're in Lebanon, have a great time. If we can help, get in touch, but please log your details with us so that we can, if there is a problem, we can reach out to you." It failed completely. Because people didn't want to share those. They didn't want to share their mobile phone numbers with the British Embassy, with the government. And so, very directly, there, the the lack of trust in my institution meant that I was less able to do my job of protecting those people by getting those warnings to them. Mohammed, does that resonate with you? And how do we, as a profession, gain that trust as diplomats? How do we gain the public's consent?
You know, to be honest, I think, especially looking at COVID and this effort by Apple and Google to put out an API that allows contact tracing and warning while respecting privacy. You know, there's no reason, I think, why, and it's not advanced technology, I think now, it just requires, as the minister says, political will and investment. But I think there's no reason why such a message, if there are systems that people can really trust and believe when they understand how it works, you don't need to know it's, Mohammed Abu Shahab who came into this country. But if the system can send a automated and anonymous, what you need is to be able to reach Mohammed Abu Shahab. And if the system can, in a, let's say, encrypted, trusted way, pass this information to you as the embassy, and for you to be able to trust the system to say, okay, now I want, because there's this crisis that's happened, now I want the system to send out a message that says, this is the action that you need to take in this circumstance. I think there are ways that you can do so while either respecting privacy or by giving the level of comfort and opt-in options for a person to decide what they want to share and what they don't want to share. And so, I think that there are ways, probably not advanced technologies, but even existing technologies where you can find solutions, but it requires innovation, it requires investment, it requires people to think about it, and the political will to say, okay, I will do it that way. I don't want to know it's Mohammed Abu Shah, but I want to know it's my citizen, and I want to be able to get a message to them in a way that they're comfortable with.
Minister, will this be easier in societies, maybe in non-Western societies? Where's your head in that debate at the moment?
So I'd like to touch upon something that you said, which I found interesting. And I actually had this conversation during one of the Pioneer Series sessions that the Dubai Future Academy talked about. And you're part of the academy, so you might have seen it. But people asked me about privacy, and they said, what do you think of what's coming next? And this is going to be a controversial view, but I don't think that privacy is everything that we think of it as. I don't think that you do have the privacy that you assume you have, right? So I'll give you a simple example. People are really worried about facial recognition cameras, for example, being deployed everywhere. But no one pays attention to the CCTV cameras that are across every street in every country on earth, right? And we don't consider that a breach of privacy. We are very reluctant for governments to be monitoring our whereabouts or to be hearing our conversations. But we're a bit spooked when we say a word and Google gives us an advertisement of that specific thing, and we laugh about it, right? Yeah, we have this joke and we consider it something that's quite intriguing. It's because there's a lack of trust in our political institutions, and that is concerning. Now, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer that they run yearly, the UAE ranks among the top 10 countries on earth. So, in that sense, when you do take a decision to have a service delivered to your people, there might be more onboarding in terms of buy-in from people to actually use that service. I would assume. I think that certain countries where the trust in government is high, people will feel like this is being done for their best interest. Now, the other issue with governments is we're really, really bad at designing services. This is a fact. So if you look at Apple designs products and services that a 2-year-old can navigate and a 90-year-old can navigate, and it doesn't require any training. So you don't need to actually go through a long onboarding process. You just give the phone to a kid for 5 minutes, and he'll be touching things around until they know how to use it. So why is it that we can't do that? I wouldn't be happy to, or I wouldn't be keen to answer a text message from the ambassador when I land into a country, to be honest. That's not something that I'll be comfortable with. But if I have a application, so let's assume right now we're going to use an example. If we have an application like, WeChat or one of these universal applications that some of the countries have, and a pop-up comes up in the application that I use daily, that tells me that, for your safety, just make sure that you let the embassy know if you're fine or not. And if you'd like, we can offer an increased level of security if you switch on your location services. I'll be more actually likely to do that, because I don't need to go out of my way and deal with the platforms I'm not used to dealing with, and going to get a service that I'm not used to. So ultimately, what I do believe is that we are going to go into a world where governments are going to create these super app platforms, where yes, your social media conversations are on Instagram and whatever else, Twitter or whatever program or platform you use. But the interface or the glue that's going to connect all of these feeds together, that's going to connect everything from your payments to your emails, to your social media feeds, to your map services, etc., is going to be something that the government provides.
Mm.
And look, I know that there is a lot of concern about privacy, especially in Europe. But today, there are certain platforms that are non-local, they're non-state players, and they're international, who have, let's say, people who are funding them, who might not think of the best interest of your country. You can try to penalize them in the same way that Europe has done with the GDPR. But the challenge here is you'll be able to penalize the big players. But what about the small players that have just as much data and have just as much influence? TikTok is coming up on people's phones right now, and everyone's using it. And you see a lot of alarms being raised. Before TikTok, the US wasn't really paying attention to social media platforms and their power. So I do believe that governments need to create this glue. They need to create the platform that everything else is pushed on. And governments need to focus on trust. That is a big, big thing. Countries that don't have, or countries where the citizens don't trust their governments, are not sustainable. I don't think you can continue running a country where the citizens don't trust in the institutions.
And I would say maybe I anticipate that the governments that provide those services in a user-friendly, easy, smart way, that have opt-in options and high level of trust, are going to be the trailblazers.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question in for Michelle. Let's have a crack at this one. Because my instinct would be that peacemaking, the negotiation of a peace treaty, for example, the ultimate pinnacle of diplomacy. That's what's going to get you your Nobel Peace Prize, Mohammed, in the future. You'd think this would be one of the hardest aspects of diplomacy to automate or to assist with technology. And yet, if you come back to Omar's point about look at areas where you have a lot of data, where data is heavily involved. Actually, if you're doing a peace process, data about scarcity of water resources or population movement, or if you're doing a trade deal, can AI now do a better trade or climate change deal than humans can if it takes out some of the human complication? So I'd like to put that to Mohammed and then to Omar.
Look, I imagine that it must be able to, because you're right. Like you said, with the officials that you met with, who had a history of 15 meetings with the previous British ambassadors, if you can input into a system details of data about how, if you can gather and I think it is possible, every negotiated solution, political, economic, whatever, as much data as you can gather, and allow the artificial intelligence to draw out some of those connections, some of those realizations, some of that analysis that maybe a team of 100 people wouldn't be able to do in 50 years, and this can do it in a month or less. Then perhaps it can also offer, it won't give you there's probably no silver bullet, but it can probably give you a percentage of saying, look, in such a situation, there's a high probability that this type of solution might work in this circumstance. But of course, it will depend, what do they say, rubbish in, rubbish out. It will depend on how the quality of the information that goes into the system. But I can imagine that I think there's no reason why it wouldn't be possible to at least assist, not give you, present you with the Nobel Prize winning deal on a silver platter, but at least be able to better your odds at arriving at that deal.
I'm sure, by the way, there are many diplomats where you are in Brussels and also in London, actually, who would love to delegate the Brexit negotiations to a very sophisticated piece of AI. But Minister Omar, what do you think? Can technology help us to negotiate?
I'm definitely sure it can. And I'd like to say that whenever you want to see if an issue is possible, look at the other side of the coin. If the bad guys can do it, then the good guys can as well. There are a lot of case studies now that talk about how Facebook's algorithm was used to influence the genocide in Myanmar, right? If you're able to use technology to influence people to do bad things, then you can also use technology to influence people to come together and to go through peace. Theoretically, it is possible. It just requires the will and the willingness, and also requires the passion from both parties, or from one party at least, to try to push towards that. But in peace treaties and agreements related to that, it goes far beyond technology. And I'd like to give an example from the UAE. If you look at all of the information that exists online, and you look at, for example, whether or not you can create a treaty between Muslims and Christians, it'd be very unlikely, because you have a lot of far-right Muslims, a lot of far-right Christians, you have a lot of people that are in between but are indifferent. But it took a leader, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, and it took, let's say, the willingness and the dedication, determination to make it happen. And to some degree, we did not solve the issue, but we created a landmark kind of meeting where two of the leaders of both religions came together and signed an agreement of fraternity. We didn't necessarily need cutting-edge technology to do that. What we needed is the drive, the discipline, and really the dedication to ensure that we see this through. It's the same with the Eritrea and Ethiopia peace agreement. The same individual, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, and the leadership of the UAE, really went out of their way to try to get these two countries to come together. And I remember welcoming the president of Eritrea in the UAE. I was his, I was the person that was welcoming him in the airport. Took him to the presidential palace. And I remember him saying, all we needed was someone to come and bring us to the table and help us have a conversation where no one's going to fight with the other party, like someone who can be a mediator. And you don't need technology to do that. What you need is a leader that is disciplined enough, that is mature enough, that actually sees the potential and is able to convince all parties. So I know we'd love to dedicate this or delegate this to technology, and we'd love to say that there's a silver bullet. But this requires many moving parts. You can do it. It is possible. Again, if you can imagine it, I do believe that you can execute it. But it requires a lot of work.
Thank you. I've got one final question I want to chuck in from Nadine, which actually links to what Omar said about checking whether the bad guys are doing it already. And she's asking about the way in which some countries are effectively weaponizing social media through, in particular, through trolling. I think it's actually not happening as much, maybe in my experience, as it was maybe 2-3 years ago. You gentlemen are more diplomatic than me, so you won't mention the countries concerned, but I used to get lots of Russian-generated trolling. Is there a way of using technology to counter some of those more divisive and polarizing messages with messages that are actually more about reconciliation and tolerance and living together? Do we need the diplomatic equivalent of the troll? Who would like to go first?
Okay. Look, if I can give my 2 cents here, I think that there must be a way to use technology in order to help in identifying credibility or authenticity, or identifying some of the trolls or bots or whatever it is. And I think that we're bombarded with content, and I think there must be a way, and I'm sure that people are already working on this, ways for you to let's say, ranking the quality of the credibility of this report, or of this social media influencer, I think there's a combination of fact checking, there's a combination of activity, there's a combination of flags, red flags that can be that can come out. And so I think it's more an issue of having systems that can help better inform us. We will still be confronted with this information, and maybe nothing can tell you this is 100% true or 100, this is certainly fake news or not fake news. But at least it can give you a, A, B, C ranking of, where does this sit from the slew of criteria and information that it takes? How much of a grain of salt do you need to take this content with? And then it's for you to decide, I subscribe to this, or I believe that this is more genuine than the system tells me, or, I take the systems, or I trust the system in this. But, I think there really ought to be something like that, because we are inundated with facts and information. And frankly, in this day and age, you just don't know what's true and what's not. And getting a little bit of help through systems that are well designed, that are, broadly, I would say, the more buy-in you have, the more, let's say, countries or stakeholders that are involved in this process. So it's not one beneficiary that can design it or manipulate it as they would wish. The more you have, this be a broad effort, I think the more that we can trust it, and the more we can see it as a sort of a tool that one would be happy to use and trust.
Thank you. I'll go over to the Minister now, and can I also ask you, Minister, to also offer us your kind of summing up as well, your concluding remarks on your impression of the conversation and any ideas or challenges you have for us actually as diplomats going on from this conversation.
Thank you, Tom. And I'd like to just echo exactly what His Excellency Ambassador Bashab said with regards to creating some sort of verification mechanism where people can verify if this content is real or not, if this content makes sense or not. And especially if we're going to look at the age of deep fakes, where you're able to create content that would really spook people and make them feel like this person did say this, and that, this is something that will take people down to the streets. We need to move fast on creating these platforms. I'd also like to say there's an Arabic saying that says, "من أمن العقوبة أساء الأدب," which in English translates to, for those who know no punishment will misbehave. Unfortunately, the laws that we have on the digital space and on trolling and the things that people are doing in this space, there isn't really any penalty for it. If you troll someone online, what is the worst thing that can happen? And I think that there needs to be a global consensus on what are the punishments for someone who uses these platforms for political reasons, for terrorism, for certain things like that, and work backwards. If you create some sort of barrier that makes people going into this be scared that they might be penalized, you might have a reduction in that. So the verification platform is one part of this, and I think the penalty side is the other part of this. Now, with regards to concluding remarks, first, thank you very much for having this conversation. It was eye-opening, and I think it was a very enjoyable conversation. I hope that this is true for those who are on the receiving end. I do hope that our conversations were beneficial. The final remark I'd like to say is I genuinely believe that the best form of technology or the best form of service is one that a person can get with the least amount of, let's say, steps taken. So what makes Apple's products good is you can actually navigate the product, you can get whatever you want without having to go through 1,000 windows or 1,000 authentications, etc. And my challenge to the diplomatic sector is, how can we offer a service for people that are coming to get the consular services or whatever services you want, or even for the stakeholders who want the information from you? How can we develop all of that mechanism in such a way where they're able to get the content with the least amount of steps necessary? How can we streamline it? If we are the country of the future, and that's what most people think of as the UAE, how can we ensure that we give them the best, let's say, process going forward? There's a science that I really like, which is called psychoaesthetics, which is the way that design makes you feel. And psychoaesthetics is what Apple uses quite well. And the moment you hold an iPhone or you hold an Apple product, even though it might not be, so much more expensive than the alternative, it just feels like such a good product, such a dependable one, so futuristic, so durable. And I think we can use that science for our embassies, the way that our embassies are designed, the way that our processes are put together, the way that we communicate as well to the people. If we do that, we really are going to get a lot more bang for our buck. So I do hope that the people that are listening in on this, and His Excellency Ambassador Bishab as well, can try to experiment with this. And you might not get it right from day one, but if we do it over and over again, I think we're going to be far ahead of the competition.
Thank you very much indeed. There's a challenge for us all to take away. And thank you so much for your contributions today. I'll ask Mohammed as well for any closing thoughts you have, Your Excellency, in Brussels.
No, look, thank you very much. Really, it's been an honor and a pleasure to be on this platform with you. And I think I couldn't agree more with His Excellency the Minister when it comes to technology that is user-friendly, that is intuitive, that really doesn't get in the way. You're able to interact and get what you need and leave with it feels like a light touch, and you leave with a sense of satisfaction that this worked and served me very well. And of course, I think it's, I am certain, I know that we are in the embassy, and I know that in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we are looking at this crisis as an opportunity for us to advance and to move quickly. And it's certainly, I think, an opportunity that we won't squander. I hope that by putting in place some of the ideas that His Excellency the Minister spoke about, some of the things that we discussed on this platform, that we are able to accelerate, that future role of embassies that we can imagine, that we can, dream of, but make it happen a lot sooner. And I think, we're already seeing this. There's already a lot of thinking about how should diplomats function, how should embassies function. This is, being put into hyperdrive at this point. So I'm excited about it, and I hope that these changes are ones that you'll all be able to see and benefit from soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yes, indeed, we'll have done our job today if someone watching has had this sort of eureka moment where they've come up with this great step forward for how we're going to use technology to enhance our diplomacy in the future. We always say to the students, you've got to connect the dots. And the two of you have given us loads of dots to connect. And I really hope that people feel inspired to go away and do that thinking, because the challenges ahead, future pandemics, an age of migration, the climate crisis, the rise of extremism globally, these will all require more and better diplomacy. And at the moment, I think many people in the field sense that we're losing the arms race. We're not keeping up. We're not using technology as effectively as we can. And in some cases, as the Minister mentioned, the bad guys are using it more effectively. And so you've touched, both of you today, just coming back to those 3 C's, how we consolidate info, maybe how we move from just looking at hindsight with our data to actually looking at insight, and then maybe even foresight to help out. You've talked a lot about how we can use technology to help us communicate more effectively. And then that real magic ingredient of the connection that comes back to what Mohammed described at the very, very beginning, that sort of the magic of diplomacy, the human connection, which I still think means that we'll be one of the last professions to be automated. But clearly there's a long way we can go to actually ensure that the tech works for us. I will be running off now to patent Diplopedia, a knowledge management tool using all of this, using AI, Diplobots.
Diplopedia.
We'll be patenting Embassy of the Future, which is an idea. It's not a building. It's about connection. It's not a castle. It's about connection. And who knows? But now, thank you to everyone who contributed questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions. I promise that I will answer any tweets that are there. with their permission, I'll pass on questions to our two fantastic contributors as well. Thank you to everyone who has joined us for the conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. And most of all, finally, thank you to the two of you. You're excellent. There's no plural. There's no collective noun for excellencies. But thank you to you both for a fantastic conversation. And I hope that we can continue this conversation in the future. We need it. So thank you very much indeed. And have a great weekend.
Thank you, Tom.
Pleasure. Thank you, Ambassador Tom. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
All right. Bye. Thank you.